This is the Tamiya Dyna. I've actually had this buggy for a little while now, maybe a few months. I just haven't really had the time to do an overview video of it. So why don't we go over it now? This was sort of the final version of the Astute series of buggies. So the first generation competitive two-wheel drive buggy that Tamiya tried to make was the Astute, which I have an example of right here. I made an overview video of this, and although it's a very interesting chassis, it had many flaws. The front bulkhead was weak. It had metal bushings in all of the joints, all the suspension joints, that made it very heavy. The rear differential was not very well built, and the gearbox would heat up and sort of warp the gearbox, and thereby warping the drivetrain, and it screwed up everything. And it had these rear toe blocks, which were very interesting for adjustable rear toe, but it was also quite sloppy. So there's a lot that needed to happen to this to really make it not only competitive, but also robust. And I do have some plans for some things I'd like to do to this, one of which being adding an upper deck here to reduce chassis flex, which is actually kind of what the Dyna did. All right, so that was one of the kind of interesting differentiating features between the Astute and also the Super Astute, which only had a single deck here, and the Dyna. This has an upper deck and a lower deck. And it's, to be fair, it's not exactly an upper deck. It's kind of a two-piece unit. So you have this battery cup. It's just a plastic cup that goes around the center of the chassis here, and then you mount. You have this little battery holder here, and then just on the front side you have this fiberglass brace that acts as the upper deck. What I'd like to do on this is just have basically a plate that goes over it to really stiffen it up. But anyway, getting back to the Dyna. So that was one of the features of this chassis. If you look kind of closely at the suspension, some of the joints still have metal bushings. I believe these joints here have metal bushings. The rear inner hinge pin mounts for the suspension arms, I believe there are also bushings in the actual block. You can't see it here in the suspension arm, but in the actual mounting block that's adjacent to the gearbox, you have a bushing here and a bushing on the other side. So they did not completely eliminate the use of bushings. They just used less of them in the Dyna. You have more adjustability options for the suspension geometry. I believe you have 3 holes in the shock tower in the front. You have 6 in the rear, so you can adjust ride height and shock angle. In the front, you can adjust camber gain. There's 2 holes for that, one here and one there. In the rear bulkhead, you have adjustable holes for both camber gain and roll center, kind of similar to what you would see on the older RC10 chassis. Okay, no adjustable toe-in because that was actually taken out for the Super Astute. It was just too sloppy, so you just have a standard rear hub carrier, although it's made of plastic. The rear gearbox, I think, was a very interesting unit, possibly ahead of its time. So if you look through the instruction manual, you'll see that the slipper clutch that was included in this actually has 3 slipper plates. 3 slipper pads, and that would be 1, 2, 3, I think 4 slipper plates. So imagine like a modern RC10 has a VTS slipper clutch, and some other modern chassis have multiple slipper pads in their drivetrain. This, I think, was the very first off-road buggy to have multiple slipper pads as part of the slipper clutch unit. And this car was made in 1992. So that's over 20 years ago that this kind of idea was incorporated into a design. So in my view, it was very much ahead of its time. So that's kind of a very neat feature of the drivetrain there. This particular chassis, I believe, is a re-released version in 2000. 2002, I think or 2003, they re-released the Dyna, and as I understand it, all the parts are exactly the same as the original. The only difference is the motor. The original Dyna came with an Acto-Power pink motor. I don't remember how many turns it had, but it had ball bearings in it. This one is the same motor design, except it doesn't say Acto-Power on it, and it uses bushings. But it's otherwise the same motor. That's going to come out, and I'll probably put a 17.5 in there if I ever plan on actually running this. Maybe, we'll see. Another thing that was interesting about this chassis were the shocks. So if you look at older Tamiya, high-end Tamiya chassis like the Egress and the Avanti, and even the Top Force Evolution, they came with what were called high-cap dampers. If you look at my Egress videos and my Avanti 2001 videos and my Avanti 11 videos, 2011 videos, you'll see that I used those high-cap dampers. And those were silver body or gray body shocks. They were just a larger diameter shock body. The Dyna used kind of an evolution of that design. So you had a high volume shock body, but on the inside of the shock body, there was a little, how do I describe it? Kind of like a sleeve. It was a Teflon sleeve that you would slide into the shock body, and the shock piston would ride up against that sleeve. And since it's Teflon coated, it'd be very low friction. So rather than actually coating the inside of your aluminum shock body with Teflon, they just put a little Teflon sleeve in there. And you could presumably just replace that sleeve when it wears out. So that was kind of a neat design. I don't exactly remember what the actual shock seal design is. I believe it's 2 O-rings with a washer in the middle. I'd have to go back and take a look. But otherwise, everything, two-wheel drive buggies are generally pretty similar, especially once you get to sort of semi-modern ones like this, as far as how the caster blocks are and the spindle carriers are and the suspension arms and everything. I took sort of a closer look at the front design here, and one thing that I'm not too crazy about is the front bulkhead. It's less bad than the Astute. The Astute front bulkhead is crap, to be honest, because it's really it's a load-bearing structure, and it takes the brunt of an impact if the car bottoms out on the front on like hard landings. So you're bound to break it here, and that's generally, it's known to snap at that location. Now on the Dyna, you kind of fix that problem by having an upper deck here to minimize overall chassis flex, but there are other parts of this bulkhead that I think are problematic. So for example, the front shock tower mounts to the bulkhead using this screw here and this screw here. And the amount of plastic that's on the bulkhead between the shock tower and the screw that comes in on this side is I would say it's relatively thin. So if you have a lot of force that's applied to the shock tower, maybe you land upside down or something and it's going to push the shock tower forward, you're going to put a lot of stress on this little plastic lip here, and it might end up breaking. So that's probably the biggest weakness of this front bulkhead here. One thing you might consider doing, and I've kind of thought about this, is maybe trying to figure out a way to add a plastic block to this little opening here, so that you can basically add more structural rigidity to the bulkhead. So instead of the screw stopping here, it might stop back here somewhere. And so if you land upside down and the shock tower gets pushed forward, that plastic block is going to push down against the bulkhead, and it'll basically help to brace this part here of the bulkhead from breaking. Okay, so that's one thing I thought about doing. I would just need to find an actual little chunk of plastic that would fit appropriately there. But if you were going to try to reinforce this front bulkhead, that would probably be the first place to start, is to try to reinforce this bit here. There's some little lip on either side of these. I think over here it broke off. This probably is just to hold in or to define the front of where this top plate goes. Let's see. This guy's a little dirty. Once I got it off of eBay and the person shipped it, I never had a chance to clean it because I've had so many other projects going on. So it needs a bit of cleaning. Maybe in time. I mean, this is a very low priority project for me because it's already in pretty decent condition. It just needs to be cleaned. But maybe I'll get a hex head screw set. You know, rebuild the shocks, all that funny business. But I don't plan on doing any modifications here. This was already a very nice sort of competitive chassis as it was made, so there's really not much you need to do to it. So I don't think I'm really going to make any changes. But that's the Dynastorm. It's a pretty cool chassis. I remember reading about it in RC Car Action way back in the day and always wanting one. And just like every other high-end Tamiya chassis, it's ridiculously overpriced compared to its competitors at the time. But that's the Dynastorm. And this is its little granddaddy. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching.